had a request to do a couple videos over a couple items. This video is going to be over triggers. Um, so the first thing we want to know is how triggers work. What we're going to go ahead and do, and let's grab our little bar here and bring it closer to us. We're going to go into our gizmos and pull out your trigger. And then we're going to pull out this here just so we know where that trigger is. And then we also want something to be affected by the trigger. And there we go. So just wanted to make sure it was the right height there. So what we'll go ahead and do, and I'm just going to make this a little bigger, that way we can manipulate it a little bit. There we are. What we're going to do is we want this trigger to do something to this object. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create something for this trigger to do. For instance, right now we're just going to move this trigger or this object up and down based on what this trigger does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a scripting block right here behind. There we are. And let's just name it trigger tutorial. There we are. So now that we have that, we can get rid of this when world is started, and we're going to come over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to put this script on this trigger so that this trigger is the brain of everything, and it's telling everything else what to do. It's a simple script, up and down. So what we're going to do is when trigger is entered by, and let's do this, when trigger is entered by an object, when trigger is exited by an object, when trigger is entered by a player, and when trigger is exited by a player. So what we want to go ahead and happen is when it is entered by an object, let's go ahead and cause a movement here. So we're going to move by, and we'll do 1 on that one there. We're going to move, and actually let me delete these ones here. What we'll do is we'll move by over time. Move by over time, and I'm just going to grab this one here, duplicate it, and grab this and duplicate it down here. So now, when the trigger is entered by an object, our X is one direction, which is going to go farther and closer to me. Our Y is going to be up and down. So I'm just going to go ahead and put 0.5 is where I want to move over 1 second. And we're also going to make a variable, which we'll cover in another video, but I'm just going to name it target. So this is going to tell me what we're actually moving, target being that ball over there. And again, we're going to cover everything mostly in other videos as far as what we're causing something to do to the ball. The main thing I want to do is figure out how we're going to actually code this box, how we're going to attach it to that, and then what this target does. And then we'll cover something else here in just a moment, a little more complicated as well. So on trigger exit by object, I want it to move down, so I'm going to do negative 0.5. When trigger is entered by player, I'm going to have it move left or right, so let's do 0 here, and this is my left and right. So 0.5 and negative 0.5, and let's turn this to 0. There we are. So right now, just the way this is scripted, it's telling us when the trigger is entered with an object, it's going to move up 0.5 units over 1 second. When the trigger is exited by the object, it's going to move the opposite direction down by 0.5 units. Then, to differentiate when an object touches or when the player touches, the player, when entering, it'll move left or right by 0.5. And then when it exits, so when the trigger is exited by player, it's going to move the opposite direction of when it entered over 1 second on the target. So now that we have this and we named it trigger tutorial, so that's right here, we need to now tell this how to interpret the code. So let me pull that back here. So the first part, or I guess the second part, by player, that's easy. That's going to tell us when my hand or body or whatever part of me, my head, enters this, it activates the enter, it activates the exit. No real hard coding there, we just need to tell it when a player does it. But an object, there does need to be something else, because what if we had 5 different objects, right? Well, how would it know which object we want to happen in it? Or do we just want every object entering that to activate it? Well, that's not the case on certain puzzles, or anything for that matter. So we want this object to activate that, nothing else. So the first thing that we're going to go ahead and do, let's make this grabbable. So we're going to go to interactive, grabbable. And then the second thing that we're going to do here is we're going to go to attributes. Now this is one of the most important parts when you're messing with objects that interact with another objects. So you don't want the trigger, you want the object that you're actually activating the trigger with. And you're going to go to attributes and enter a tag. So in this case here, we're going to name it, let's just name it box. I know it's not a cube, but that's perfect. We'll name it box here. And then we're going to go to the trigger here. And instead of doing the actual tag itself, we're going to go to behavior and enabled on. If it's off, it's not going to do anything. And then trigger on, we either want to trigger it with player or with object. Only one or the other. And I'm going to name it box here. Then the other thing that we want to do is that script that we had here under trigger tutorial, the one that tells us what happens when an object or a player enters it. It's named trigger tutorial, so we're going to come down here to attach script on the actual trigger itself, and we're going to add trigger tutorial. So now what it'll tell us is this target variable that we put in here. Well, what is this target variable? What are we actually going to move by those units? So what we're going to have to do is go over to this ball, open it up there, grab this little piece here, target, and attach it to this ball. So now that ball, anytime this code references target, which we've now attached here, it's going to do it to that ball. So the first thing that we have is by object. So this object here, when the object enters, it raises. When the object exits, it lowers. So if I grab this and I put my hand into this, it does nothing. If I grab this and enter it, it'll go up. When I pull it out, it goes down, up and down. Easy enough. And that's how we code whether or not an object will cause that to happen. My hand does nothing though. So what we'll go ahead and do is if we come back to this area here, we can go back to the trigger under behavior, and we're going to just do player. Now, trigger's a little different than collision by player, and the reason I say that is because right here, if I just put my hand, my body, it doesn't matter what part of me, into this, it'll move. If I exit, it'll move the other way. A collision, you have to actually have your body or your head interact. You can't actually do your hand like this here. But overall, those are the two methods, whether it's by player or object, that this trigger will cause something else to happen. Now, there's one other thing that you can do with this as well, though. So what we've done here was we've put this script on this trigger, and this trigger tells that ball everything it needs to do. But as you can see, it only does one or the other, object or player. Well, what if we don't want just one or the other? What if we want both? Well, what you can do is I'm going to delete this script here. And what that'll do is it'll cause the attached script to go away. And let's put the ball back to where it was. And I have this nifty little, there we go. I have this nifty little script over here, ball. And basically what this does is it doesn't care about whether a trigger enters or exits. What it's doing is it says when event up is received, it's going to do this action, which would be moving up. Just a couple extra things which we'll cover in other videos. When event down is received, it'll go down. When left is received, it'll go left. And when right is received, it'll go right. So the same thing we had on the other one, but now it's not saying whether this is entered, whether it's exited, nothing of the sort. It's just saying when these events are received. Well, there's 4 events attached to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach ball. And basically what ball is saying is when this event is received, it's going to do this number on target. Well, we can either say target or self, but what I'm going to do, since I already have it scripted as target, is I'm just going to say whenever that code is received, it's going to mess with itself. Itself is target. Well, back to the main point of this video, what we want to do is we want to grab this here, and I'm just going to duplicate it. So now what we're going to do is this one is going to be activated by players, and this one is going to be activated by objects. And we already named it box. Box is right here, so when the box enters this and exits, it'll do one thing. When the body enters and exits, it'll do another thing. And we can overlap them so that you don't even realize there's 2, but there will indeed be 2. And then what we'll go ahead and do, we're going to create another script here. But in this case, we're not going to tell that ball what to do because ball tells that ball what to do, but ball is looking for something to come into it. So what we're going to do is make one for that script, or make one for that trigger, I apologize. And what it is when trigger is entered by object, when trigger is exited by object, when trigger is entered by player, and when trigger is exited by player. Now remember, it doesn't matter whether this says player or object unless this is set to player or object. If this says object but this is set to player, it's going to ignore object. So that is very important to keep in mind, and that's one reason why we created 2, is so we can have an enter and exit by an object, enter and exit by a player, which gives us 4 different tasks we can do with the 2 triggers. Then what we're going to do is we're going to send event. So I'm going to go down on events, and we're going to send event to object. And I'm going to do that on every single one of these. And the object we're going to send this to, I'm just going to name it target. And again, the name doesn't matter as long as you know what you're referencing. So all of these are going to send that event to target. And what is the event name? Well, when we come back to ball over here, which is attached to the sphere, we remember that when the event up is received, down is received, left is received, and right is received. So those are the events that this is looking for right now based on what the script is telling it to look for. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell this to send that event up to that ball. So inside that script, which we'll name trigger events, send event when it's entered by object, we're going to say up. Trigger event when object is exited, the event is going to be down. When the trigger is entered by player, let's go ahead and do left. And when event is exited by player, we'll go ahead and do right. So we're telling it whenever this happens, we're going to send this trigger, whatever the name is, to what object. And we actually messed that up because we sent to self with target. That's not what we want at all. So I'm actually going to delete those. That was my fault there. So let's go back to send event to object, send event to object, send event to object, and send event to object. And again, we're going to put in that up, down, left, and right. That wasn't wrong there. Up, down, left, and right. And the part where I messed up is this is a parameter, not necessarily our object that we're going to send it to. So target is our object, and we're going to put that over self. Parameter we can leave blank. And the reason why I deleted them is because if you put something in parameter, there's no deleting it. You have to delete the whole thing and re-add it and then correct it again. So now trigger is entered by object. We're going to go up. Exited by object, we go down. Entered by player, left. Exited by player, right. As easy as it is. Now, you could have two different scripts, one for just the object, and then put that on one trigger, and then a different one for the player and put it on a separate trigger. But again, in this case here, since the trigger is automatically sorting what it's looking for, we can create one script and use it for the two different objects. So for instance, if I come to this trigger, I can put script events, and for whatever reason it's glitching just a little bit, trigger events, and there we are. And then I can come over here, and this one's gonna glitch out too, I think. Nope, there it is. So trigger events is on both of these. But again, the cube, the trigger, is doing all the sorting as far as what needs to do, but we still got to tell it what it's going to target or what it's going to affect. So we come over here, and then we come back over here, and again, we click what the object we're affecting is, and then reference is telling it what the other object is going to affect. So now, here's what will happen. When I put my hand in this cube, pull it out, it does nothing because this one's looking for the object. When I put it in this one, it goes right. When I exit, it goes left. Pretty easy.